Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Secret courts have been one of the most controversial measures to emerge from last year's Security and Justice Bill. But these secret proceedings are part of a package of reforms that appear to be eroding British civil rights in the name of preserving national security. But are the government going too far? And are there any alternative ways of dealing with terrorism? With me in the studio to discuss this are Sagir Hussain, a human rights lawyer and director of CAGE, Bernard Keenan, a former immigration solicitor who's currently a PhD candidate at the LSE, and Jeremy Corbyn, Labour MP for Islington North. On the phone, we're joined by Andrew Slaughter, Shadow Justice Minister and Labour MP for Hammersmith, and Margaret Gilmore from the Royal United Services Institute. Welcome back to you all. Well, Jeremy, let me start with you. I mean, are there alternative ways of dealing with terrorism? Do we have to have these secret measures all the time?
The point I've made in every debate on anti-terror legislation going back to the 1980s is that we have criminal law to deal with criminal acts. If somebody sets off a bomb, it's a criminal act. If somebody murders somebody, it's a criminal act. And once you start going down the road of saying we have to have special procedures for this because it's a special crime, then we end up with a situation now which, if somebody had said to me this was going to happen 20 years ago, I wouldn't have believed them. The idea that two people should be put on trial in complete secrecy. All we know is that they're being put on trial, and the jury presumably will also be sworn to permanent secrecy. So we will not know what the outcome of this is. And I think this is the consequences of the whole war on terror, Department of Homeland Security agenda that has happened since 2001. And injustices breed further injustices. We talked in the first part of the programme about the injustice of Birmingham and Guildford, the bombing people that were, well, I was very involved in those campaigns. Eventually they were exonerated and they were freed, and compensation was paid. If the same charges were put against them now, we'd probably never even know about it.
Well, Margaret Gilmore, I mean, at least there is a trial, isn't there? I mean, surely this is better than detention without trial, which was used a lot in the past.
Yeah, I certainly think that if you're going to make accusations against people and take away their liberty, there has to be some kind of a fair trial. And I've always been quite uncomfortable with the SEAC courts and total reliance and the people not actually knowing what the accusations are against them. So the one comfort I get from this not ideal situation is that the trial is going to be a trial as normal but held in secret. There will be a jury, there will be a judge, and solicitors from both sides will get to see all the evidence and everything they're entitled to see.
Well, Andrew Slaughter, Shadow Justice Minister, I believe you're available now. What is your take on this? Is this a violation that shouldn't be allowed, the secret court that's about to emerge, it seems?
Well, I've just heard in the last few minutes that the judgment by the appeal court in the current case will be tomorrow morning. We'll get the decision then as to whether or not to uphold the decision by Mr. Justice Nichols that for the first time in, probably in several hundred years, that an entire trial could be conducted in secret without a criminal trial, that is, without us knowing the identity of the defendants or what happened, without the media having access. So I'm hoping that because this is a matter of the court at present, although it could be a matter of Parliament, that the appeal court will say that that's unreasonable. They've already decided to overturn that even the facts of the trial being secret should not be revealed. In other words, until last week, it was not possible to report the fact that this secret trial was taking place. So that's an additional level of worry, and it's certainly something that we should be very concerned about.
Well, do you see this as the beginning of some sort of slippery slope, that things, if the appeal court allows this to go ahead as a secret trial, will that be a terrible precedent that would maybe follow?
Let's be clear. This is a matter that's come, unlike the Secret Courts Act last year, which was an initiative of the coalition government, which was opposed by the Labour Party, and I was acting for the opposition to that process, which dealt with civil trials For example, people who've been kept in Guantanamo or allegedly or had been extraordinarily rendered who were claiming damages, and that's the prevailing Justice Secretary and Ken Clarke were saying those matters should be secret. That was a political, if you like, action. This is on the initiative of the judiciary. This is something judges clearly have the power to keep parts of trials secret. That happens not regularly, but it's not uncommon. It might be for national security, but it might be to protect witnesses who might otherwise be endangered. So it's not something that's totally alien. But the idea that an entire trial and the identity of defendants should be kept secret, that is a departure, and I think that is something very worrying.
Well, Bernard Keenan, I mean, are there any alternative methods of dealing with terrorism, or are we stuck with this?
Well, are there alternative methods? I mean, there are alternative methods. They're not always very palatable if we're interested in preserving civil liberties, and this is always the challenge then. You know, do you wait for something to happen and then prosecute it after the fact? Or do you go in and intervene on the basis of all the information, which we now know the government is collecting about us all every day anyway? I mean, I can't say that there's any easy solutions to that question, and it always then becomes a political question. And so far, you know, MPs, Parliament has generally always supported what we can now call preventative justice, and I think that that's what we're seeing emerging here. Are there better techniques? I mean, there are principles at stake, and I think if we, as a society, bear that in mind, then there has to be a line where that we will not go past. And unfortunately, that line has been allowed to slip further and further back, just by progressive individual decisions. And it's only when you step back and take a look at the bigger picture that you can really start to say, well, where do we want to be and where are we? And I think that's the point Jeremy made. And I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, as someone who's been trained in law and who's practiced law and who's practiced in SIAC, where you don't know what the case is, you don't know what you're trying to answer, I would always say that we want an open and fair trial, but it's very hard to identify one point or one decision maker who's going to take on that responsibility. It seems to be a democratic problem, and I don't know if there's any easy answers to that.
I think the issue is democracy, because when the terrorism legislation was initially introduced in the early 70s, it was seen as emergency legislation. So we were in state of emergency, and that's why every year had to be renewed, and people recognized that how severe this piece of legislation is. And the fact that now it's permanently entrenched, see how far we have regressed in terms of the protecting the rule of law, the protecting the very values that we're supposed to be fighting in the war on terror, what we are supposed to be exporting to other countries. And that's why I think it's a very, very fundamental development. And the security services, the security state, as I say, has been able to sneak this in under the pretense of the war on terror. And we have to say, large number of people, whether it's the media, whether it's the politicians, or whether it's ordinary people, there is, they would openly admitted there's a rise in racism, and that suspicion has been, that prejudice has been used by people in Parliament or beyond to actually get this sort of a nasty piece of legislation through.
Well, when you say sneaked it in, I mean, you're assuming that the security state, as you call it, is inherently evil and is trying to sort of bring in things that undermine democracy deliberately or undermine civil liberties deliberately. I mean, do you have evidence for that?
Well, the people who have been victims of torture the last 10, 50 years will testify at the corruption at the heart of the security state. What they did, what we saw from the letters from the head of MI6, Chris Allen or whoever he is, boasting to Gaddafi how much help Britain has given to get a man, a woman, his pregnant wife and his children, lock them up, put them on a plane and take them to Libya to be tortured. And no doubt many, many other cases where the governments had to pay legislation will show that there's a lot about the security state that we should not be trust. It should be healthy part of any sort of citizen's mind not to trust the security state. But we've seen the security state has been seen to be steamrolling Parliament. And I'll give you an example where the Parliament clearly said we don't want a snooping charter, and yet what did Snowden reveal? We have a snooping charter. So it's a question of parliamentary democracy and accountability. And it's far beyond the powers of some judge at the High Court or the Old Bailey. This is a far bigger issue.
Well, Margaret Gilmore, I'm sure you've got views on that. I mean, the analysis that we've just heard from Sagar Hussain is that it really is, an evil group of people there who disregard civil liberties.
I think our challenge is really, really important. I still think there is more to be done in convincing the intelligence agencies that the traditional culture of secrecy doesn't really hold in the modern world, that because so much becomes public so much more quickly in the cyber age, in the age of the cyber revolution, they need to get used to having to be held to account and be more public about what they're doing. So I think that's important. We must keep challenging them all the time, just as this secret trial is being challenged. Tomorrow morning, when we hear from the judges, it may be that they say, actually, this can be heard in open. Wouldn't that be great? It may be that the judges have found a way of hearing more of it in the open. That would be great too. But if they do find the opposite, then I hope that those judges are going to give a very full and clear explanation of why, without giving away the state secrets that they're trying to protect.
And can we not
let's
convince the security services? Can we tell them? Because bottom line is they are accountable to a parliament. So we don't need to convince them, we order them. I think that's the kind of mindset we need to have.
Well, Andrew Slaughter, I mean, is it possible that the appeal court tomorrow could say not only that the trial has to be open, but that if the government, the prosecution, hasn't got a case that they can bring to open court, then the whole thing should be dropped and the people should be freed?
This is the crux of the argument. I mean, it is a balancing act for the courts. I don't think it is a black and white situation. They may well say that, yes, there are legitimate national security considerations, but they will not, and they might permit some parts or some evidence to be given in secret. But as I said, it is completely unprecedented to say three things. Firstly, the entire trial is secret. Secondly, the media are banned from, as well as the public, from the trial. And indeed, that the identity of the defendants should be. That is a recipe, and I think Jeremy Corbyn said earlier, for miscarriages of justice. And I think he used the example of the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4. Much of the investigation of those cases was done by journalists, people like Chris Mullin, former Labour MP. If they hadn't had that information to do that, then perhaps those people would never have been freed. So this is very worrying. Of course, people who are accused of serious offences should be tried in front of a court, and they can either be acquitted or convicted and suffer due process. But we have to say that there are, in a free and democratic society, there are certain states beyond which you cannot go. And then it is a matter, not for the prosecution. Prosecution will then have to say, we will bring this case on the terms the court has said, or we will not bring it.
I mean, Jeremy, there are cases, I think, to do with bribery in Saudi Arabia and so on, where the government has actually done the opposite. They've actually dropped a case because they say we cannot bring all this stuff out in open court because it will be embarrassing to foreign governments, and therefore we will drop the case.
That was the Serious Fraud Office investigation into the Al Yamani arms deal, which apparently was uncovering substantial elements of corruption. And Tony Blair, as Prime Minister, then intervened and apparently had the power to do so, to order them, as a government agency, to cease the investigation. I don't think, you probably correct me if I'm wrong on this, the case had actually got to court at that point. He stopped the investigation, and so it could not get to court. And that was where the independence of government agencies and judiciary versus Parliament came into question. The other point that Margaret made and Andy made about accountability of security services. Yes, Parliament is there to hold government and the executive to account. Interestingly, we have elections for all select committees in Parliament, except the Security Select Committee, which is appointed by the Prime Minister and answerable to the Prime Minister. Now that perhaps says something about this special position that the security services have, which is over and above what the police and any other public servants enjoy. And I think Margaret's point about them getting up to date with the cyber age and getting up to date with the general openness movement is something that perhaps we should be pushing a bit harder.
Well, in this case too, it's a bipartisan thing, if you like, because the Daily Mail, which you might think would be very strong on counter-terrorism, is actually attacking the government on this point, on the secret court issue.
To be fair to the Daily Mail, because I'm not the greatest fan of Daily Mail, but on the issue of open justice, they have been very consistent and very positive, because they do, my reading is, they do see themselves as the preservers of values of England and the Middle England. I suppose to the extent they've understood the issue, that the red herring, the Muslim terrorist threat, etc., is a red herring where the state is using that power to actually get more and more power. And that power will then be applied to other people who are maybe not immigrants and the wider public. And that's why I think people are waking up. And hopefully the opposition will continue to keep talking about that. And hopefully the security services won't have an easy ride. And talk about Parliament, about the Intelligence Security Committee. I mean, one of the things we read recently, I think the Mail, was that the Home Affairs Select Committee is now trying to bypass the Intelligence Security Committee in order to hold the Intelligence Committee Intelligence Agency to account. That, I think, is a very positive development, and largely because of the kind of opposition that people have shown.
Well, Margaret Gilmore, do you think that the whole Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament should be changed and it should no longer be in the gift of the Prime Minister to appoint the chairman?
Yeah, I do. I really don't think that the Prime Minister should be appointing it, because that's sort of a political appointee. I think the more independence, the better. They are the people who are scrutinising our intelligence agencies. So I think we need to keep looking. I mean, I know the intelligence agencies think they have enough scrutiny. They have a lot of scrutiny, but I do think it's an area that still needs to be moved. I also think that we have to remember that cases have been dropped by them, and in their view, terrorist suspects being set free rather than them compromising their agents or their methodology. And we're back to this great balance of, civil rights and openness versus our personal security. How do you get that balance right? But I do think we're moving to a more open age, and I think they're a little bit behind the times, and we need to bring them with us. And I hope that the judges will have found some ways of allowing some of this case to be put out into the open.
Well, Bernard Keenan, I mean, the history of Northern Ireland, what lessons can be drawn from that? Because there were the diplock courts completely closed, etc. I mean, have they learnt anything from all that?
I think that they have learned a lot, and I think what we see in a lot of this history of the evolution of secret material is, on the one hand, there's an increasing tendency to rely on preventive measures, on speculative information, and to protect the sources of that so that we don't find out what they are, and the state insists on the right to keep it secret. But on the other hand, what you have is this increasing, what you could call like a second order of accountability. And so by that I mean, for example, in SIAC's closed material procedures, you have a lawyer who's appointed as a special advocate, and their job is to argue for disclosure and to try and challenge the secret material. It's not a fair trial in my view, but functionally they're there to sort of give some assurance that there's something in there. We also have the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism legislation, who performs a very similar function and reports to Parliament about what the security services and the police are actually doing, again without disclosing secret information, but publicly talking about it. And I think that the parliamentary committee needs to be reformed. There needs to be much greater parliamentary scrutiny, but we're always going to have this layer where secret material is allowed to operate. The security services are allowed to retain a free hand to operate in society, and we have to rely publicly on this second order of trust. And that's the thing that's very different from Northern Ireland. Obviously, the intervention by the British Army into Northern Ireland ended up making things a lot worse in the early 70s, and that was because it didn't have any attempt at really engaging with people and with dealing with these legitimate concerns. I don't want it to sound that I'm saying that this is a positive thing, but I think it's an interesting development, and I think that we have to be very alert to the potential for abuse that then opens up, and the trust that we're placing on these individuals, often just individuals who are independent, but who are being asked to perform a function for the entire society about risky material, and that is almost an impossible job in my opinion, but it's something that's proliferating, and I don't think it's something we should just calmly accept.
And Andrew Slaughter, I mean, there's one of the other things that they're doing is this passport, potential right to take away the passport by Theresa May of people who they don't, for one reason or another, they feel a threat. We've discussed that, of course, before on analysis, but is that something that will be open to the courts to challenge? Can somebody go to court if their passport is being taken away?
Well, there may well be a challenge under international law, if not under Human Rights Act, which of course later got brought into UK law. I think what's concerning about that, I mean, even if even if you conceded the point that this would only be used for what would believed to be extreme cases, that you're creating a new class of stateless person, that you're creating a more unstable environment. You're passing a problem over, to whom? To who knows? It seems quite irresponsible for a government like the UK government, which has always prided itself not just on human rights, but also on being an upholder of standards of international law, go down this path. I mean, it may well end up, again, just being counterproductive.
Well, I think on that note, we will have to end this programme. Thank you very much, Margaret Gilmore. Thank you, Andrew Slaughter, Jeremy Corbyn, Sagar Hussain, and Bernard Keenan. And thank you, of course, all for watching at home. And please tune in again for future discussions. And don't forget, you can always keep up with the discussion on Islam Channel by following us on Twitter at the address that you see below on your screen. Or you can follow Islam Channel Current Affairs on Facebook. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.